All right, so in this demo, I'm going to show you 2 easy ways to create kind of a delayed timer. So in this example, somebody in the community asked about how do I create something where the user has to hold a button down for 3 seconds. So I think in their work environment, they had a machine, you had to hold it down as a safety system. So they wanted to simulate that. You also see this a lot like on bank sites. So if you want to integrate something like that in your training where it's like, prove that you're human, hold this down for 3 seconds. So we're going to look at 2 ways to do that. The key thing is like, how do we get 3 seconds out of something to trigger it? So we're going to do one using a wipe animation, and we're going to do another one using variables. So let's look at these, and then we'll build those quickly. So I'm going to go ahead and preview the scene. So what we're going to do here is, on this one, I'm using a timer I built, and this would be moved off the slide, but when I hold this button down, it's going to get the trigger moving. When I release it, it's not going to continue. So I have to hold it for 3 seconds, and you can see it resets the value, right? Now you'll notice, I don't know if you notice, it goes from 0 to 1. The reason is we have a trigger here that says when this animation completes, sets it to add 1. And when we click the button, we reset it to 0. But then what's going to happen is it's going to complete the animation and set it to 1. So that's something we'll have to think about, right? So you release it, and you can see it's at 1. But then when I click on it again, it starts at 1. So then it actually would only go for 2 seconds before it got to 3. So we'll look at that. There's some nuance to that. The other one is using a wipe animation that lasts 3 seconds. So when I click, if I release it, click, release, but I click and hold it for 3 seconds, that will then trigger. In this case, we have a smiley face. So let's go ahead and build these out real quick and talk through what's going on. Really great exercise to kind of dig around and play with the tool. So we're going to go ahead and create our first one. So let's set it up. We know we're going to have a button, right? And we'll say press down for 3 seconds. Oops, I don't know why I put a capital S. All right. And we're going to say, in this case, we're just going to trigger feedback. So we're going to insert a shape. We'll do a smiley face, and we'll have a smiley face here. We'll make it green. And then we want this smiley face to appear. So we're going to have the initial state of the smiley face be hidden. And we have our button here. Now, one of the cool things about Storyline is you have these pre-built states, which you can see here. And one of them is the down state. With the down state, the pre-built states are nice because you don't need to have triggers. They just do what they're supposed to do. In this case, the down state just means I'm holding that object down. And when I release it, it's kind of like a click. If I hold it down and release, that's a click. But if I just hold it down, that's just going to be in the down state. So a lot of people do that in buttons to kind of make it look like there's some movement in the button. We're going to change the color of the down state. So I'm just going to click inside of here, select this object, and we're just going to make it, let's just make it green, just to indicate that it's in the down state. All right, so let's see what we have here. So the default is we preview it. I can hold it, release it, hold it. It's in the down state. I release it. I can hold it as long as I want to hold it, release it. It's not down. All right, so what we want to do is I want to hold this for 3 seconds and then have that smiley face appear. So we don't have to rebuild this. I'm just going to duplicate this slide. So the first thing we're going to build here is the one with the wipe animation. So I'm going to insert an object. We're just going to insert a shape. And we're going to call this our meter, right? Or you could call it 3 second meter if you want to do that. 3 second meter. And I'm going to make that red here. I'm going to turn off the outline. So this one, we want to have the come on the screen and wipe in for 3 seconds. So we're going to add an animation up here. We're going to do an entrance animation, wipe, and we're going to have it wipe from the left. We're going to have it last 3 seconds, or however long you want your interaction to last, right? So what's going to happen is, oops, did I change that? Okay, 3 seconds. So what's going to happen is when this object comes on the screen, which we see right now at the beginning of the timeline. When this object comes on the screen, that's going to trigger the entrance animation, and it's going to last 3 seconds. So we've got two things. We've got this 3-second entrance animation. Once this animation is complete, we know it's took 3 seconds, then we can trigger something. We want to control that animation with this using that down state, right? So click down. So what we want to do is, like, when you're holding it down, we want the entrance animation to go. If you release it, we don't want the entrance animation to complete. So let's do something. First, we want to put our final trigger on here. What do we want to do? We want to change the state of the smiley face, and we're going to set it to normal, and we'll say when the animation completes, and that's going to be the 3-second meters entrance animation. So let's just make sure that's working. It's going to start automatically. Once the animation is complete, boom. So that works perfectly. So now what we want to do is control the animation. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set this one initially to hidden. So we're going to set the initial state to hidden. And again, once this comes on the slide, that's going to trigger the entrance animation, which will trigger the wipe. So what we want to do is we're going to say, change the state of this to normal when the user presses this button down. So let's go ahead, create our trigger. What do I want to do? I want to change the state of the 3-second meter to normal when the state of the button is down. Hit OK. Now it's not here. I hold it, that triggers the animation. When I release it, it's still going, and then it triggers. So we need to, when I release it, I want it to stop. So what we're going to do here is we're going to create another trigger. So let me just copy this one. So copy and paste it. And then on this one, we're going to say change the state of 3-second meter to hidden when the state of the button here is not down. So if it's down, it's going to be normal, and it's going to trigger the entrance animation. When it's not down, it's going to hide it, and then that's going to, the buttons, it's going to be hidden, and when I click it again, it's going to restart it. So now you can see we've got this working animation. So I click, release, click, release, click, hold it down for 3 seconds, and it's done. Now what happens when I let go? It's hidden. There's an easy way to fix that. We're just going to create a cover on top of this, because then visually it's going to look better. So we're going to create a cover. Let me just do a rounded rectangle. Oops. I'm going to do rounded rectangle here. Put it right over the shape. And what I'm going to do for the rounded rectangle is I'm going to change the fill shape to no fill. So it's going to allow the meter to show through. And I'm going to put a really thick and dark outline on here. So let's make this really thick. All right. So this should be sitting on top of our meter. We have our rectangle as our cover. So we're going to call that our cover. And let's put that on top of our meter. So now we've got one problem solved. It's going to look better, right? It's going to look better. But we'd have the same issue that once it's complete and I release it, it disappears. What we're going to do is we're just going to change this. This is on top. We're just going to change this state. So we're going to create a new state for the cover, and we'll go complete. We'll create a completed state, right? So custom state, and we're going to fill that completed state with red. Oops, it didn't. I don't know what I did here. All right, let me go backwards. All right. I'm going to grab the object to make sure I'm on the right object. Completed state. We're going to, oh, you know what I did? This was one of those pre-built things. We're going to change the fill color to red. I just changed everything, the outline and all that. Okay. So now we have a completed state that's going to sit on top. So we just need to have a trigger that says change the state of the cover and set the state to completed. And we'll just say when animation completes, when the 3-second meter entrance animation completes. So now what's going to happen is I press this down, and when it's complete, and then that changed the state, so now you can see it. Even if I keep pressing, the animation is happening underneath it, but you don't see it. The other thing you can do is just change this button to disabled so you can't click it again, but this is a simple way to do that. All right, the next one is a little bit more complex, but it gives you some flexibility because you're working with variables. We'll just show how to build it real quick. So we have the same thing. When I'm holding something down, I want to trigger something, but I need to hold it for 3 seconds. The first one, we had a wipe animation that lasted 3 seconds. In this case, we're just going to build our own little timer. So let's build the timer first. Super simple to do that. We'll just add a shape. Doesn't really matter what it is. We're going to add a shape here. We'll call this our timer. And then what we're going to do is we're going to add a motion path animation to it. Again, it doesn't matter which motion path. And we want that motion path to last 1 second. So it's good to name things here. So we're going to call this timer path. So now we know this timer path is going to last 1 second. What's going to trigger it when I hold this down? So we're going to say move. Let's open the trigger up. So move timer along the timer path when the state of the button here, the state of the button is down. And so what's going to happen is when I preview this, it's going to trigger the movement. What we want it to do is keep looping, right? So let's go ahead and make it loop. And so, because we know this lasts 1 second, so we're going to 1, 2, 3. That's how we're going to build our timer. So let's go ahead and add another trigger. What do we want to do? We want to move the timer along timer path when the animation completes of the timer, and the animation is the timer path. So basically, it's going to move along the timer path. When that animation completes, it's going to move it again. And so that's what creates the looping. So we're going to press this, and it's going to trigger the looping. Right? And now it's just going to keep looping. When we know every time it completes, it adds 1. Now we want it to stop. So how do we get it to stop? Well, what's causing the looping? The looping is caused by the animation being complete. The animation starts because we press on it, based on it being down. So what we're going to do is we're going to put a condition on the loop. And we're going to say, yeah, you can loop, but the condition is that that object, the button, needs to be, the object needs to be down. So it's only going to keep looping if the object is down. So let's go ahead and preview this. And I hold it down. As soon as I let go, it stops looping. It's going to complete that motion path, right? So it's always going to complete the motion path. So now we have a mechanism to count to 3. So we're going to add a variable here, and that's going to be our number. So let's go ahead and add a variable first. So you just come up here. If you've never worked with variables, pretty simple. I mean, variables can be complicated, but building the variable is pretty simple. You're just going to create a variable, which is just a bucket to hold information. In this case, we're going to create a new variable here, and we're just going to call it Tom, or I'll call it timer demo. Oops, timer demo. And we use a number variable because we're using numbers, and we're going to set the initial value to 0. So we have a timer demo. Set our initial value to 0. Let's just make sure things are changing. So we're going to add a text box. Add a text box here. Oh, I think it's when I'm recording these things. So we have our text box, and we're going to say timer equals, and then we're going to insert a reference to that variable, which is timer demo. And we can make this much larger just so we can see the text. All right. So we'll just put this here. So every time this completes, that's 1 second, we can add 1 to this variable. So we're going to go ahead and add a trigger on here. What do we want to do? We want to adjust a variable. So which variable? We're going to add the value of 1 to timer demo. When the animation completes, you've got your timer demo. Oops. What are we doing? Yeah, when the animation completes the timer on timer path. All right. So what's going to happen? I release it, it stops, and it starts here. Now you notice there's a problem, right? Release it, it stops. Once it gets to 3, we want it to trigger the happy face. The problem I have here is the way these variables are counting. Let's go ahead and replay this scene so we can look at this again. So I click on it, that starts the animation, but when I release it, it's going to stop the animation, but the variable is still going to be at, whatever it was at. So if I hold it and I release it, not complete the animation, that's at 2 seconds. If I start it again, it's picking up at 2. So it really is only going to get to 3. So it only takes 1 second. So we got to figure out, there's always a few different ways to do this. So one thing we could do is we could say, if I press and release, that's a click. So I can say when I click on that, that means I've released it. I can reset the variable to a certain value, right? And so I can reset the variable and we can say just set it to 0. What's going to happen though is if I set it to 0, I click and release, see, it still finishes the animation. So if I set it to 0, it's going to finish the animation. It's going to add 1. So then I need to figure out, well, how do I deal with that? And again, there's a few different ways you can do that. We're just going to keep it simple so we can see it. So first thing we want to do is we want to, when I click on the button, so I click and release, I want to set the timer to 0. Right, so it's going to reset it. And then when I click again, it has to take 3 seconds. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to create a trigger on here. What do I want to do? I want to adjust variable here. Which variable? I'm going to set my timer demo to the value of 0 when the user clicks the button. So you're going to see what happens here. It's 0, it's counting 1, 2, I release it, it stopped, and I click on it. See how it set it to 0? And then it sets it to 1. Why does it set it to 1? Because even though I release it, that registers the click, it sets it to 0, but the animation's still going to end up completing wherever I'm at, which is going to add 1. So there's some things you can play around with the numbers. You can use the value of 4. Let's see if we can set the initial value when we release it. Let's see if we can set the timer demo to the value of -1. And let's see what happens, because then it'll complete the animation. It'll be 0. So let's go ahead and preview the slide. I hold it, I release it, hold it, release it. So by setting it to -1, it's going to go to -1, but the animation is always going to complete, which is going to add 1 to it, which is going to reset it to 0. Now when I click on it, it starts 1, 2, I release it, goes to -1. And you could see that if I release it at the top of the animation, I release it, it's -1, it goes to 0 because it completes the animation. So that solves the issue, right? So you're always going to start, and it's 1, 2, release it, goes to -1, completes the animation, ends up at 0. So, and the user's not going to see all that, but that's the thing to keep in mind when you're working with that. And then what we're going to do now is we're just going to say, change the state of the smiley face, set it to normal when variable changes, and we'll say when the timer demo is equal to, so timer demo is equal to the value of 3. So now what should happen, I hold it, I release it, it always is going to reset it, right? Hold it down for 3 seconds, and that should then change that. And so you have 2 ways to do that. You've got that wipe animation, which works really great, or you've got the timer with the variables. The Wipe animation is obviously a lot easier to set up. What variables give you that you don't get with these state changes is variables just give you more control. So in this case, it's pretty simple, so it probably doesn't matter. But if you had something more complex with your timer or a mechanism like this, then having variables gives you more control because you can do things as that data changes. So it's really just a matter of what you want to do. In this case, I would probably just do the wipe animation. But this is one other way you can do that. And again, when you're working with these tools, there's always 2 or 3 other ways to do that. There may be a different way that you can think of doing this. From a tutorial perspective, this is just a way for us to dig through the tools and kind of talk through things we want to do and how the features work. So hopefully you got something from that. If you have questions, jump in the community and ask, and we can help you out.